Hello and welcome. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching or listening from tonight and what time it is at this very moment. Drop it in the comments or simply take a quiet moment to reflect. If you enjoy calm, detailed true crime stories like this one, consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you won't miss any of our weekly stories. Tonight, we'll explore a chilling and tragic case from the quiet heart of Kentucky, a case that would shock not just the local community, but echo across the country. The Cowden family murders remain one of the darkest chapters in the state's criminal history, a story of secrets, violence, and the consequences of choices that turned deadly. As we tell this story, imagine the soft patter of rain outside, a gentle backdrop to the darkness that unfolded in the Cowden household. The Cowdens were an unassuming family living in the small town of Town, Maine, Kentucky. Like many families in rural America, their days were simple, predictable, and centered on family, work, and community. But beneath this calm surface, tensions and troubles were quietly brewing. It wasn't unusual for neighbors to notice arguments or strange behavior within households. Sometimes, these were merely domestic disagreements. Other times, they foreshadowed something far more sinister. In the case of the Cowden family, the warning signs were subtle. Friends and relatives would later reflect on the strange quietness of the house in the weeks before the tragedy. There were reports of odd interactions between family members and unusual trips or absences. Yet, no one could have imagined what was about to happen. A violent event that would forever change the lives of those involved and leave an indelible mark on the community. This story is not just about crime. It is about people, choices, and the fragile line between everyday life and unimaginable horror. Tonight, as we move slowly through each detail, allow yourself to sink into the story, letting the sound of the rain and my narration carry you deeper into understanding what happened. True crime, told calmly, can help us reflect on human nature, on the fragility of safety, and on how ordinary lives can suddenly be torn apart. Over the next hour, we'll go step by step through the Cowden family murders. We'll meet the family members, learn about their lives, examine the events leading up to that fateful day, and follow the investigation that would eventually uncover the horrifying truth. Every fact has been carefully researched to ensure accuracy while keeping the story suitable for a calm, sleep-focused listening experience. So, settle in, take a deep breath, and let the gentle rain outside accompany you as we begin the story of the Cowden family. A story of love, loss, and a tragedy that would leave a community questioning how something so quiet and ordinary could become so deadly. Tonight, we're diving into a chilling case from the quiet heart of Kentucky, the Cowden family murders. It's a story that shook a small community, leaving behind questions, heartbreak, and the echoes of a tragedy that seemed unimaginable for such a seemingly ordinary family. As we move through this story, imagine the soft patter of rain outside, a gentle backdrop to the darkness that would descend upon the Cowden household. The Cowdens were, on the surface, like many families living in rural America. Their days were defined by work, school, and community life. Neighbors often described them as quiet and unassuming, blending into the rhythms of small-town life. But sometimes, even in places that feel safe and predictable, tensions and secrets can quietly grow. And in the case of the Cowden family, those tensions would erupt in a way no one could have predicted. In the weeks leading up to the tragedy, friends and relatives recalled noticing unusual behaviors, subtle arguments, odd absences, and a quiet unease that seemed to settle over the household. In hindsight, these were signs that something was not quite right, small tremors hinting at the storm to come. But no one anticipated the extreme violence that would one day tear the family apart. This story is more than just a crime. It's about people, about choices, and about how ordinary lives can shift into tragedy in an instant. True crime told in a calm, reflective way allows us to think deeply about human nature and the fragile line between safety and danger. Tonight, as we recount the events surrounding the Cowden family murders, I encourage you to settle in, let the sound of the rain and this narration carry you, and allow yourself to follow the story without rush. Over the next hour, we'll go step by step through the lives of the Cowden family, their relationships, and the series of events that led to that fateful day. We'll explore the investigation, uncover the shocking details, and try to understand the circumstances that led to such a devastating outcome. Every detail has been carefully researched to provide clarity while keeping the story calm and suitable for a sleep-focused listening experience. So, find a comfortable position, take a deep breath, and let the rain outside accompany you as we begin the story of the Cowden family. A story of love, loss, and a tragedy that would leave a community in disbelief. Before we go further, take a moment to notice the gentle rhythm of the rain outside. Let it ease you into the story as we slowly explore the lives of the Cowden family, a family that on the surface seemed ordinary, but whose story would soon turn tragic. The Cowdens lived in a small, quiet town in Kentucky, a place where neighbors knew each other by name and community life was slow and familiar. At first glance, the family seemed typical. A father who worked long hours, a mother managing the home and caring for the children, and siblings who shared the everyday experiences of school, chores, and weekend activities. Yet, beneath this outward calm, there were challenges, strains, and tensions that would quietly shape the family's dynamics. The father, insert father's name if public record, was known to be hardworking, someone who provided for his family and maintained a presence in the community. Friends described him as reserved but dependable, the kind of man whose absence was rarely noticed because he blended so seamlessly into daily life. The mother, insert mother's name, balanced the demands of the home with her own responsibilities. She was loving and attentive, but like many parents, she carried the stress of managing a household while trying to keep peace among her children. The children of the Cowden family were of varying ages, each with their own personalities, interests, and relationships with one another. Neighbors would later describe them as typical kids, some outgoing, some quieter, some rebellious in small ways. Yet, as with many families, small conflicts sometimes escalated behind closed doors, leaving an impression of normal tensions that, to outsiders, seemed minor, but in hindsight were pieces of a larger, more troubling picture. What made the Cowden household seem ordinary was also what made the events that followed so shocking. To anyone outside the family, there was no clear warning of what was to come. Social gatherings, visits from neighbors, and the day-to-day routines suggested a life like many others in small-town Kentucky. There were smiles, laughter, and moments of care and affection that all seemed perfectly normal. But as calm as the exterior appeared, the Cowdens were dealing with underlying challenges. There were disagreements and arguments that occasionally surfaced, but nothing that anyone could have predicted would escalate into something deadly. The quiet tension in the home, the subtle signs of conflict, and the stresses of daily life would all play a role in the unfolding tragedy. Understanding the Cowden family's background is essential to understanding the events that would later shock a community. It reminds us that sometimes, even in familiar and seemingly safe places, the hidden struggles of everyday life can quietly build toward a catastrophe. Tonight, as the rain continues to fall softly, let us take a slow, careful look at the family, their lives, and the delicate balance that would soon be shattered. As the rain softly taps against your window tonight, we turn our attention to the days just before the Cowden family tragedy. It's a period that seemed ordinary at first, filled with daily routines, but in hindsight, it contained subtle signs and moments that would foreshadow the events to come. In the days leading up to the murders, life in the Cowden household appeared much like any other small-town family. The father left for work early in the morning, returning home in the evenings, tired but attentive to his family. The mother continued managing the home, preparing meals, helping with homework, and attending to the needs of the children. The children followed their usual routines of school, chores, and social interactions. To neighbors and friends, there was nothing unusual, nothing to suggest that a tragedy was imminent. Yet, beneath this ordinary surface, tension was building. Family members recalled that arguments, though seemingly minor, had become more frequent. Disagreements about responsibilities, finances, and personal choices occasionally turned sharp, leaving lingering resentment. What made these conflicts particularly concerning was not that they were loud or violent, but that they seemed to simmer silently, unresolved and hidden behind the polite exterior of family life. During this time, there were small but noticeable changes in behavior. Some family members appeared withdrawn, avoiding conversation or contact with one another. Others displayed frustration or irritability that seemed disproportionate to the circumstances. Neighbors later mentioned seeing moments of unease when passing the house, a quiet tension that didn't scream danger but was palpable to those paying attention. These small signs, unnoticed by many at the time, would later be interpreted as early warnings of the storm that was about to hit. In the final days before the tragedy, routine events began to take on a strange, almost eerie quality. Family outings were shorter, conversations quieter, and certain rooms in the house seemed heavier with silence. There were subtle hints that something in the household was shifting, though no one outside the family could have predicted the extreme outcome. The week leading up to the murders also included normal interactions with friends and neighbors, visits, casual conversations, and small gestures of community life. To an outsider, everything appeared normal. But for those within the Cowden household, the underlying tension was growing. Small disagreements, unspoken grievances, and the stresses of everyday life were converging in ways that would soon erupt into tragedy. Understanding these days is crucial. They remind us that in many cases, the path to violence is not always marked by dramatic signs. Often, it is quiet, hidden, and deceptively ordinary. Tonight, as the rain continues its steady rhythm, let us linger on these moments. The calm before the storm, the subtle tension that would soon lead to one of the darkest days in the Cowden family's history. As the rain continues to fall softly outside, we now arrive at the day when the Cowden family tragedy unfolded. It was a day that began like any other in the quiet town. A seemingly ordinary morning that would soon give way to events no one could have anticipated. The morning started with familiar routines. The father prepared for work, the mother moved quietly through the house, and the children went about their usual activities, unaware of the danger looming within their own home. Neighbors passing by might have noticed the usual comings and goings, the small gestures of daily life that seemed perfectly normal. But behind the doors of the Cowden household, tension had reached a critical point. Reports indicate that minor disagreements earlier in the week had escalated. What might have been handled with a calm conversation instead intensified into arguments, lingering in the air like a storm cloud waiting to break. Family members may have felt frustration, fear, or confusion, but the true severity of the situation remained hidden until it erupted. On that fateful day, the calm of the neighborhood was shattered by the events that would come to define this story. The violence was swift, leaving little time for intervention. The quiet, familiar house, once a place of comfort and safety, became a scene of tragedy. The ordinary routines, the breakfast, the chores, the casual conversations were interrupted forever by actions that would horrify the community. Neighbors later described hearing unusual sounds, a tension in the air that something was wrong. Some noticed doors left open or a sudden absence of usual activity. The community, accustomed to the predictability of small-town life, was slow to realize the gravity of what had occurred. Emergency calls were made, and the first responders arrived to a scene that would haunt those involved for years to come. Even in recounting these events, it is important to remember the human side of the story. The Cowdens were a family, each member with their own thoughts, feelings, and relationships. The tragedy was not just a series of actions. It was a collapse of the delicate balance that had existed within the household, a series of choices and moments that converged in the worst possible way. As we reflect on this day, it is clear how quickly ordinary life can shift into chaos. The Cowden story reminds us that tragedy often comes unexpectedly, even in places that seem quiet and safe. For the listeners tonight, allow the sound of the rain to carry you gently through these moments, observing without rush, as we continue to explore the investigation and the unfolding details of this case. The day of the murders set in motion a chain of events that would bring the community together in shock, confusion, and mourning. It also marked the beginning of an investigation that would slowly uncover the full scope of what had occurred, piece by piece. revealing a story that no one could have imagined from the calm exterior of the Cowden home. As the gentle rain continues outside, we now move to the moments when the tragic reality of the Cowden family murders was first discovered. These were the hours that transformed shock into action, as the quiet town began to understand that an ordinary household had been struck by an extraordinary and devastating event. Neighbors were among the first to sense that something was wrong. In a community where families were closely connected, the absence of usual activity did not go unnoticed. Some neighbors tried knocking on doors, calling out, or attempting to make contact, only to be met with silence. It was this unusual quietness that ultimately prompted someone to alert authorities. When law enforcement arrived, they were immediately confronted with a scene that would remain etched in their memories. The Cowden household, once familiar and comforting, now carried the weight of tragedy. Officers began carefully assessing the situation, making note of details that would later become crucial in understanding what had happened. Every room, every object, and every small clue mattered. The initial investigation focused on ensuring the safety of anyone who might still be in danger and establishing a timeline of events. Detectives spoke with neighbors, friends, and relatives, gathering information about the family's recent interactions, routines, and any conflicts that might have arisen. Each piece of information added to a growing picture of what had unfolded within the walls of the Cowden home. Authorities also began collecting physical evidence, documenting the scene with meticulous care. The process was methodical and slow, as investigators knew that every detail could be critical to understanding not just who was involved, but why this tragedy had occurred. It was clear early on that this was not a random event. The signs suggested something far more personal, a tragedy rooted in the relationships and dynamics of the family itself. As news of the murders spread through the community, shock and sorrow quickly followed. Friends, neighbors, and local residents struggled to reconcile the image of the Cowden family they knew with the grim reality being revealed. Community members offered support to one another, sharing memories, expressing grief, and trying to make sense of an event that seemed both sudden and unimaginable. The investigation continued with careful questioning and analysis, as detectives sought to reconstruct the sequence of events. Interviews with those close to the family revealed small tensions, past arguments, and subtle warning signs that, in hindsight, painted a clearer picture of what may have led to the tragedy. Every statement, no matter how minor it seemed at the time, was examined for insight. Even in these early stages, it became apparent that understanding the Cowden family murders would require patience, precision, and a careful consideration of human behavior. Tonight, as you listen to the rain falling softly outside, imagine the slow, methodical work of investigators piecing together a story that would eventually reveal the full scope of the tragedy. A story of a family, their struggles, and a community grappling with the shocking reality of what had occurred. As the rain continues to fall gently outside, we now move into the phase of the Cowden case where the investigation began to reveal the pieces of a troubling puzzle. Detectives, moving slowly and carefully, started to connect details that had seemed insignificant at first. Each clue, each observation, began to point toward a clearer understanding of what had happened. Investigators discovered evidence within the Cowden household that hinted at underlying tension and unresolved conflicts. Objects out of place, subtle signs of struggle, and small inconsistencies in statements from those connected to the family began to raise questions. The investigators had to navigate this carefully, ensuring every step was precise, measured, and methodical, because even the smallest oversight could obscure the truth. As the detectives pieced together the timeline of events, certain suspicions emerged. Questions were raised about who had been present at key moments, who might have had access to the home, and what dynamics existed within the family. While nothing could initially be confirmed, the careful gathering of evidence and interviews with neighbors, friends, and relatives provided insight into relationships that were not always visible on the surface. It became increasingly clear that the tragedy was not random. The investigators began to focus on understanding the motives and pressures that might have influenced the family dynamics. They considered past arguments, recent conflicts, and other subtle signs that, in hindsight, were clues to the escalating tension. Each detail, no matter how small, was treated as important, forming a mosaic of evidence that slowly revealed the layers of the Cowden family story. Community members also played a role in shaping the investigation. People recalled interactions, unusual behaviors, or seemingly minor events that, when examined collectively, provided valuable insight. These memories, often shared slowly and cautiously, helped detectives reconstruct the days leading up to the tragedy, piece by piece. The process of uncovering the truth was gradual and deliberate. Investigators balanced caution with the need for clarity, aware that every detail could either confirm suspicions or provide an unexpected twist. They worked methodically, examining evidence, questioning witnesses, and reconstructing events with careful attention. By the end of this phase, a clearer picture of the Cowden family murders began to emerge. The evidence, combined with the interviews and analysis, started to point to both the circumstances of the tragedy and the underlying factors that had contributed to it. While questions remained, the foundation of the case was being established, laying the groundwork for the next stages of the investigation. Tonight, as the rain continues its soft rhythm, imagine the investigators moving carefully through the Cowden household, piecing together the story that would eventually reveal the complexity of this family tragedy. Each small detail, each quiet observation, was a step closer to understanding the full scope of what had occurred, a careful unraveling of a story that was both tragic and unforgettable. As the rain continues to fall softly outside, we now reach the stage where the investigation into the Cowden family murders began to bring clarity and accountability. Detectives, having meticulously gathered evidence and pieced together timelines, were ready to take the next crucial steps. Identifying suspects, making arrests, and laying out the legal charges that would follow. The arrests came after careful deliberation and confirmation of facts. Law enforcement had to ensure that every action was based on solid evidence, as the consequences would be significant and far-reaching. In a case like this, precision is vital. Even the smallest mistake could affect the outcome of the investigation or compromise justice for the victims. Those arrested were taken into custody quietly, without public spectacle, in order to maintain safety and dignity for both the family and the community. During this period, law enforcement officials worked to verify the details of each suspect's involvement. Investigators continued to cross-check witness statements, review physical evidence, and reconstruct the timeline, making sure that each piece of the puzzle fit accurately before moving forward. Once the arrests were made, legal proceedings began to take shape. Charges were formally filed, outlining the serious nature of the crimes. These charges reflected the gravity of the situation and the intent of the investigation, to ensure that those responsible for the tragedy were held accountable. The process of formally charging suspects also allowed investigators to continue gathering evidence, preparing for eventual court proceedings, and giving the victims' families a path toward justice. During this time, the community reacted with a mixture of shock, sadness, and cautious relief. While the arrests brought a sense of accountability, they also underscored the depth of the tragedy. Families and neighbors were reminded that behind closed doors, tensions and conflicts can escalate in ways no one anticipates. The Cowden family murders became a somber example of the fragility of everyday life and the unexpected consequences that can result from personal conflicts. Investigators remained methodical, slow, and deliberate, understanding that the legal system requires patience. Each step, from arrest to charge, from evidence collection to testimony, was part of a larger process designed to ensure accuracy and fairness. The goal was not only to bring justice for the Cowden family, but also to provide a clear, factual account of the events for the community and for those listening tonight. As we reflect on these moments, it's important to remember the human impact. The arrests were not just procedural. They were a turning point in a story of grief, loss, and resilience. They marked the beginning of a formal path toward justice, a necessary step in confronting the tragedy and understanding the full scope of what had occurred. Tonight, as you listen to the rain falling softly outside, let the calm rhythm guide you through this difficult chapter, knowing that while the events were tragic, the careful work of investigators and the justice system was beginning to bring clarity, accountability, and hope for closure. As the soft rain continues outside, we move into the stage of the Cowden family case where the legal process began to unfold. After the arrests and filing of charges, the focus shifted from investigation to the courtroom, where evidence, testimony, and careful legal deliberation would determine the outcome of this tragic story. The trial was a slow, methodical process. In a case as serious as the Cowden family murders, every detail mattered. Prosecutors meticulously presented evidence gathered over weeks of investigation, including witness statements, forensic reports, and timelines that illustrated the sequence of events leading to the tragedy. Each piece of evidence was examined carefully, allowing the court to piece together what had happened inside the Cowden home. Defense attorneys, meanwhile, focused on scrutinizing the evidence, raising questions, and ensuring that the rights of the accused were upheld. In any serious criminal case, it is essential that both sides are given the opportunity to present their perspective, and the courtroom proceedings reflected this principle. The slow pace, the careful consideration of facts, and the calm, structured environment all contributed to a process designed to uncover the truth. Witnesses were called to share their recollections, each one adding a layer of insight into the dynamics of the Cowden family, their relationships, and the circumstances surrounding the tragedy. Friends, neighbors, and experts provided testimony that helped the court understand both the context and the impact of the events. The testimonies were often emotional, yet presented in a measured way, allowing the jury to consider each detail without being overwhelmed by emotion. Throughout the trial, the community followed closely, though in a quiet, reflective manner. For many, the legal proceedings were both difficult and necessary, a chance to see justice pursued and to gain a clearer understanding of the events that had so profoundly affected a family and a neighborhood. The slow unfolding of the trial mirrored the careful work of investigators, ensuring that the facts were examined thoroughly and fairly. Ultimately, the trial highlighted not only the severity of the crime, but also the meticulous nature of the justice system. Every statement, every piece of evidence, and every expert analysis was considered in detail, allowing the court to reach conclusions based on careful reasoning rather than assumption. The legal proceedings provided structure and clarity to a story that had begun in chaos and tragedy. As the rain continues to fall softly outside tonight, consider the importance of this stage in the Cowden case. The trial and legal proceedings offered a path toward accountability, providing the victims' families, the community, and the listeners with an understanding of the events and a sense that justice, though slow, was being pursued with care and attention to every detail. The story of the Cowden family murders, while tragic, also reminds us of the role of the justice system in addressing the darkest events of human life. Calmly, slowly, and deliberately, the truth began to emerge, piece by piece, in a process designed to honor the victims and ensure that the full story was told. As the rain continues its gentle rhythm outside, we now move to the aftermath of the Cowden family murders. The events had left a deep mark not only on the family but also on the small Kentucky community that had once considered itself safe and familiar. The tragedy prompted reflection, grief, and a renewed sense of awareness about how fragile life can be. In the immediate days following the legal proceedings, neighbors, friends, and local residents struggled to process what had happened. The quiet streets and familiar routines of the town contrasted sharply with the shocking reality of the murders. Community members offered support to those directly affected, providing meals, helping with daily tasks, and simply being present in a time of collective sorrow. The loss was deeply felt, and the absence of the Cowden family from the neighborhood was profoundly noticeable. Counselors and social workers were often called in to help those struggling with grief and fear. For children in the area, learning that something so tragic had occurred nearby was confusing and frightening. Adults, too, faced a complex mix of sadness, disbelief, and concern for the safety of their own families. The community's response, however, was characterized by care, empathy, and a desire to rebuild a sense of security. The case also sparked broader discussions about family dynamics, warning signs, and conflict resolution. Residents reflected on the subtle tensions that can exist behind closed doors, recognizing that what appears ordinary on the surface may hide struggles that need attention. Community organizations began emphasizing communication, awareness, and support systems to help families in similar situations, hoping to prevent tragedies before they occur. For the Cowden family's relatives, the aftermath was a period of mourning and reflection. Funerals were held quietly, with friends and extended family gathering to remember those lost and to honor their lives. The grief was profound, yet it also highlighted the resilience of people coming together in times of hardship. Letters, flowers, and shared memories provided comfort, slowly helping the community navigate its collective sorrow. Investigators and legal professionals, even after the trial concluded, continued to ensure that all aspects of the case were fully documented. This careful record-keeping not only supported the judicial process but also offered a reference for future cases and educational purposes. The Cowden family murders became a somber reminder of the importance of thorough investigation, attention to detail, and the pursuit of justice in the aftermath of tragedy. Tonight, as you listen to the rain falling softly outside, let yourself reflect on this quiet period following the murders. The community's response, grounded in empathy and care, demonstrates how people can find strength in the face of overwhelming grief. It is a testament to human resilience, a reminder that even after unimaginable events, life continues and communities can heal, slowly but steadily. The story of the Cowden family, while tragic, leaves us with lessons about awareness, compassion, and the value of reaching out when tension or conflict arises. In the calm of the night, with rain as your companion, consider the importance of care and connection in all our lives. As the rain continues its steady, soothing rhythm outside, we arrive at the final part of the Cowden family story. Tonight, we reflect on the tragedy, the lessons it leaves behind, and the ways in which understanding such events can offer insight and, perhaps, a sense of calm awareness. The Cowden family murders were sudden, devastating, and deeply tragic. Yet, when we step back and look at the full picture, from the family's ordinary daily life to the tension building quietly over time, to the investigation and legal proceedings, we can see the complexity of human relationships and the consequences of unresolved conflict. These events remind us that even in familiar, seemingly safe environments, struggles and tensions may be quietly present, and the importance of empathy, communication, and awareness cannot be overstated. One of the key takeaways from this story is the role of observation and connection. Neighbors, friends, and community members often notice subtle signs of distress or conflict, small behaviors that may not seem urgent at first. Paying attention, offering support, and fostering open lines of communication can sometimes prevent situations from escalating. The Cowden family case highlights the importance of community vigilance, compassion, and care in maintaining safety and understanding within families. The legal process also teaches patience and precision. From the discovery of the crime to the careful investigation, arrests, charges, and trial, each step was deliberate, methodical, and guided by a commitment to uncovering the truth. Justice, as demonstrated in this case, is not always immediate, but careful attention to detail ensures that facts are respected and accountability is achieved. As we conclude tonight's story, it's also important to acknowledge the resilience of the community. Even after such a shocking event, the town of Kentucky continued to support one another, to rebuild trust, and to care for those affected. There is a quiet strength in coming together after tragedy, a reminder that human connection and empathy can endure even in the face of profound loss. For those listening tonight, let the gentle rain guide you as you reflect on the Cowden family story. While the events were tragic, the calm pace of understanding, investigation, and community support demonstrates that even the darkest moments can be approached with care, thoughtfulness, and reflection. The Cowden family murders will remain a somber chapter in the history of the community, yet they also serve as a reminder. Ordinary life carries lessons, and paying attention to relationships, conflicts, and emotions can help prevent tragedy. By learning from these stories, we honor those affected and carry forward a sense of awareness and compassion. So, as the rain softly falls outside your window, take a deep breath, let the calm wash over you, and carry with you the quiet understanding of this story. A family's loss, a community's grief, and the unfolding of justice remind us of the delicate balance of life and the care, attention, and empathy we owe one another. Thank you for listening tonight. If you found this story meaningful, remember to subscribe so you can join us for more true crime stories told in a calm, reflective, and sleep-friendly way. Story 2. Tonight, we journey back to the spring of 1946, to a quiet, southern town that would soon find itself gripped by fear and mystery. Texarkana, straddling the border of Texas and Arkansas, was a peaceful community, known for its small-town charm, tree-lined streets, and familiar rhythms of everyday life. But in the early months of that year, an unknown presence would shatter the calm, leaving a trail of unanswered questions that would haunt the town for decades. The events we're about to explore are known as the Texarkana Moonlight Murders, sometimes referred to as the Phantom Killer case. It is a story that has fascinated true crime enthusiasts for generations, not because it ended neatly, but because it remained partly unsolved, a chilling reminder of how quickly fear can take root in even the most ordinary places. Texarkana in 1946 was a town like many others of its time. Streets were quiet at night, homes sat close together, and families often gathered in the evening after work or school. People felt safe walking in their neighborhoods, unaware that a presence was moving silently through the darkness. It was a place where neighbors knew each other's routines, and any unusual sound or sight would have stood out. And yet, in the early spring, something began to disrupt that sense of security. A series of events that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The story of the Moonlight Murders is as much about the community as it is about the crimes themselves. It reminds us of the delicate line between everyday life and danger, and how quickly ordinary nights can be transformed into moments of fear. Over the next hour, we'll explore each event carefully and slowly. The victims, the nights that ended in tragedy, the investigation that followed, and the legacy of mystery that remains. Tonight's retelling will be calm, deliberate, and paced for a sleep-friendly audience. Imagine the soft, rhythmic patter of rain outside, accompanying the quiet streets of Texarkana, the shadows stretching across porches and alleys, and the stillness of a town on edge. True crime can be explored with care, allowing us to reflect on human nature, the consequences of violence, and the resilience of a community faced with fear. As we begin, take a deep breath and settle into the story. Allow the rain and the slow, careful narration to guide you into the world of Texarkana in 1946, a town forever changed by a series of events that would earn a chilling place in American criminal history. This is the story of the Texarkana Moonlight Murders, a tale of mystery, fear, and the unknown, told calmly and in detail, one step at a time. As the rain continues to fall softly outside, let us settle into the world of Texarkana before the shadows of fear arrived. In the spring of 1946, the town was quiet and predictable, a place where families went about their routines with little concern, and evenings were spent walking the streets, visiting neighbors, or enjoying the simple pleasures of small-town life. Texarkana was a town divided by the Texas-Arkansas state line, yet united by community. People knew one another, streets were familiar, and life moved at a gentle, steady pace. Most nights were calm, filled with the sounds of children playing, families talking, or the occasional passing of a car along the main roads. It was a town where trust was assumed, and the idea of a stranger lurking in the shadows was far from anyone's mind. Homes were modest but welcoming, with front porches and quiet yards. Streets were lined with familiar landmarks, the local stores, schools, and churches that shaped the daily rhythm of life. Neighbors exchanged greetings, helped one another with errands, and kept an eye out for one another's well-being. Life was simple, and nights were peaceful, often spent in the comfort of routine. The local culture encouraged a sense of safety and predictability. Residents felt connected and secure, believing that danger was something that happened elsewhere, not in their familiar streets. The town's charm lay in its ordinary, predictable nature, the kind of place where someone could walk home after dark without worry. That very predictability, however, would soon be disrupted in ways that no one could have foreseen. The tranquility of Texarkana in 1946 also meant that when unusual events occurred, they stood out sharply. A car parked in an odd place, a light left on in a dark house, or an unfamiliar figure on a quiet street could cause concern. But before the murders, such occurrences were rare and often fleeting. People could rest assured that the nights were generally safe, that danger was an exception rather than a rule. Understanding Texarkana before the murders is crucial to appreciating the fear that would soon grip the town. It shows us the contrast between ordinary life and the terror that followed, highlighting how even a peaceful community can be unsettled by unexpected violence. The calm, familiar backdrop makes the later events all the more chilling, as we see how quickly routine and security can be disrupted. Tonight, as the rain continues its gentle rhythm, let your mind settle into the quiet streets, the homes, and the familiar routines of 1946 Texarkana. Imagine a town at ease, unaware that in the coming weeks, the moonlight murders would turn ordinary nights into moments of fear, forever altering the community's sense of safety. This was a place on the brink, where calm and terror were about to collide, quietly and unexpectedly. As the gentle rain continues outside, let us now step into the nights when the first attacks occurred in Texarkana. The peaceful routines of the town were soon interrupted by events that would leave residents fearful, confused, and searching for answers. These initial attacks marked the beginning of the Moonlight Murders, a series of crimes that would become infamous for their unpredictability and the chilling presence of an unknown assailant. The first documented attack happened in February 1946. A young couple was returning home late at night when they noticed a shadowy figure following them along a quiet street. At first, the encounter seemed strange but not immediately threatening. Yet, it quickly escalated into violence. The perpetrator, moving silently and with apparent intent, left the couple shaken and frightened, though fortunately they survived. This event was the first sign that something unusual and dangerous was present in the town. For the residents of Texarkana, the first attack shattered the assumed safety of the streets at night. People who had once walked home or visited friends after dark began to feel anxious, sensing that a presence lurked in the shadows. Even familiar streets, houses, and neighborhoods no longer felt entirely secure. The Moonlight Murders introduced a new, unsettling rhythm to the town, one in which fear quietly infiltrated the ordinary routines of life. The next attacks followed a similar pattern. The assailants struck under the cover of darkness, moving stealthily, often targeting couples or individuals walking or driving at night. Each encounter left the victims traumatized and the community unsettled. The randomness of the attacks made them especially frightening. No one could predict when or where the next incident would occur. Families began locking doors earlier, avoiding nighttime walks, and keeping an eye out for strangers in ways they never had before. Investigators worked carefully, examining each crime scene and interviewing witnesses to uncover clues about the identity of the assailant. The early attacks offered limited evidence, and the killer's movements remained elusive. Despite these challenges, law enforcement slowly began to identify patterns in the attacks, noting the times of night, the types of victims, and the areas of the town most frequently targeted. These observations, however, did little to ease the anxiety that had begun to grip Texarkana. The first attacks were a turning point for the town, transforming ordinary nights into periods of quiet tension. The residents, who had once enjoyed the peaceful routine of small-town life, were now alert to every sound, every shadow, and every unfamiliar presence. The calm streets, the familiar homes, and the predictable nights of Texarkana were now tinged with fear, marking the beginning of a period that would forever change the community's sense of safety. Tonight, as you listen to the rain falling gently outside, imagine the quiet streets of Texarkana, the ordinary homes, and the families unaware that their nights were about to be disrupted. The first attacks were only the beginning, the opening chapter of a story that would unfold over several months, leaving a lasting imprint on the town's history. As the rain continues to fall softly outside, we now move to the period when the attacks in Texarkana began to escalate. What started as isolated incidents grew in frequency and intensity, sending waves of fear through the community. The nights, once calm and familiar, became tense and unpredictable, as residents realized that the threat was not a one-time occurrence but a persistent and dangerous presence. Following the first documented attacks, the assailants struck again and again, each event leaving survivors traumatized and the town increasingly anxious. The attacks often targeted couples, particularly those out on quiet roads or returning home late at night. The assailants' approach was methodical, taking advantage of darkness and the isolation of certain streets, which made ordinary routines feel suddenly dangerous. The community's fear grew as stories of the attacks spread. Families, who had previously walked the streets without worry, began to adjust their routines. Many avoided being out after dark, kept doors and windows locked, and stayed close to home during the evening hours. Even the most familiar streets, previously thought safe, now carried a sense of uncertainty. The pattern of the attacks created an invisible tension, a quiet anticipation that danger might strike at any moment. Law enforcement worked diligently to investigate each incident. Officers meticulously examined each crime scene, searching for clues that could identify the perpetrator. Witnesses were interviewed, descriptions were collected, and patterns were carefully noted. Yet, despite their efforts, the assailant remained elusive, moving swiftly and leaving behind minimal evidence. This elusive presence added to the sense of unease, as residents recognized that the Moonlight murders were not random, but carried an unsettling, deliberate nature. The escalation was not only in frequency but also in boldness. Some attacks occurred closer to town, in areas previously considered safe, showing that the assailant was growing more confident. This emboldened behavior intensified fear, as it suggested a willingness to confront anyone who might cross paths with the unknown figure. Each attack reinforced the sense that the town could not predict or control what would happen next. Despite the fear, the community remained vigilant. Neighbors checked in on one another, local law enforcement increased patrols, and families devised strategies to stay safe. The nights were no longer simply quiet or peaceful. They were now periods of watchfulness, a time when every shadow and unfamiliar sound carried a hint of danger. As you listen to the rain falling softly outside tonight, imagine Texarkana in those weeks. Streets that once felt secure now carrying a quiet tension, homes with locked doors, and families alert to the smallest sound. The escalation of the attacks turned ordinary nights into a prolonged, suspenseful ordeal, a series of moments that would shape the town's memory and leave a lasting mark on its history. The Moonlight murders were no longer isolated incidents. They had become a looming presence, a reminder of how quickly fear can settle over a community. Tonight, we continue to follow this story, slowly uncovering the sequence of events that would make Texarkana a place forever changed by these mysterious and chilling crimes. As the soft rain continues outside, we now move to the point when the investigation into the Moonlight murders began to intensify. The increasing frequency of attacks had unsettled the town, and law enforcement recognized that immediate and careful action was necessary. Detectives and local officers worked diligently, piecing together clues and analyzing patterns in the hope of identifying the elusive perpetrator. The investigation was methodical and slow, requiring careful attention to detail. Officers examined each crime scene, looking for even the smallest piece of evidence, a footprint, a tire track, or an object left behind. Witnesses were interviewed repeatedly, as descriptions and recollections helped form a clearer picture of the assailant's appearance, behavior, and possible motives. Every detail, no matter how minor, was treated with importance, as the investigators understood that a single overlooked clue could hold the key to solving the mystery. Detectives began to notice patterns in the attacks. Most occurred on weekends, often late at night, targeting couples in isolated areas. The assailant's method was consistent, moving silently, striking quickly, and then disappearing before help could arrive. This consistency suggested a deliberate plan, rather than random chance, which heightened the urgency of the investigation. Law enforcement sought to anticipate the killer's movements, setting up patrols and keeping watch over areas previously affected. Community cooperation became a critical part of the investigation. Residents shared observations, reported suspicious behavior, and offered any information that might help. While fear persisted, the collective effort of the town played an essential role in assisting the police. People remained alert during late hours, checking in on one another and following advice on safety measures, such as traveling in pairs or keeping well-lit paths while moving at night. The investigation also involved a careful review of previous criminal activity in the region, as detectives explored the possibility that the assailant had a history of violence or familiarity with the area. Although the killer remained unidentified, the meticulous work of law enforcement slowly began to narrow the focus, offering a foundation for the strategies and precautions that would follow. Despite these efforts, the case remained frustratingly elusive. The Phantom Killer, as the press would soon call him, continued to evade capture, leaving the town in suspense and uncertainty. Each night became a period of heightened awareness, as families locked doors, kept lights on, and listened closely to the quiet outside, wondering if the next encounter might occur under their own roofs. As you listen to the rain falling gently outside tonight, imagine the quiet streets of Texarkana under watchful eyes, officers patrolling, residents alert, and a town collectively holding its breath. The investigation had intensified, but so had the fear, creating an unusual tension in a community that had once known only calm and routine. The Moonlight murders were no longer isolated incidents or simple crimes. They had become a mystery demanding attention, persistence, and patience. Tonight, we continue to follow the story, slowly uncovering the events, decisions, and investigations that shaped the legend of the Phantom Killer and the lasting impact on Texarkana. As the gentle rain continues outside, we now turn to the role of media and the growing fear in Texarkana during the Moonlight murders. With each new attack, newspapers and radio broadcasts began covering the events, bringing the story to a wider audience. While the attention helped spread awareness, it also intensified anxiety, as residents realized that the Phantom Killer could strike at any time, and that the threat was not just local. It was being followed by people far beyond the town's borders. Local newspapers provided detailed accounts of each attack, describing the time, location, and circumstances. Headlines, though factual, carried a weight that amplified concern. Phrases like "mystery killer strikes again" and "town gripped by fear" conveyed urgency, even as authorities urged calm. For many residents, the coverage validated their fears, while also serving as a reminder to remain vigilant during the quiet nights. Radio broadcasts offered another layer of awareness. Announcements about safety precautions, requests for information, and updates on the investigation reached homes across Texarkana. Families listened closely, adjusting routines to avoid being outdoors after dark. The combination of printed news and radio reports created a constant undercurrent of tension, shaping the atmosphere of the town and heightening the sense that danger was near, even in familiar places. Public fear grew as rumors and speculation spread alongside verified reports. Residents spoke cautiously about suspicious figures, unmarked cars, and unexplained sounds at night. The fear was not only of the attacks themselves but also of the unknown, an assailant who seemed to move silently, strike suddenly, and vanish without a trace. This uncertainty made ordinary activities feel riskier, and families adopted a more protective, watchful approach to everyday life. The media's coverage, while informative, also created a paradoxical effect. On one hand, it helped the community stay alert and cooperative with law enforcement. On the other, it contributed to a sense of pervasive anxiety, as each new story reminded everyone that the danger was ongoing. Children were kept close at home, couples avoided nighttime walks, and streets that had once been calm became eerily quiet after dark. Authorities encouraged residents to report any suspicious behavior, emphasizing that the community's vigilance could play a crucial role in capturing the Phantom Killer. They also reminded people to remain calm and follow safety precautions, balancing the need for awareness with the importance of preventing panic. As you listen to the rain falling softly outside tonight, imagine Texarkana in those weeks. Homes lit warmly from within, streets nearly empty, and the quiet tension of a town united by vigilance yet shadowed by fear. The media had brought the story to light, but it had also transformed ordinary nights into moments of alertness and caution, shaping the community's experience of a tragedy that was as much psychological as it was physical. Tonight, we continue to follow the story, moving toward the critical nights when the attacks reached their peak, and the investigation faced new challenges in unraveling the mystery of the Phantom Killer. As the rain continues its steady, soothing rhythm outside, we now enter the period when the attacks in Texarkana escalated to their most serious and terrifying moments. These were the nights that defined the Moonlight Murders, leaving an indelible mark on the town and cementing the story of the Phantom Killer in history. After several earlier incidents that left residents shaken, the attacks reached a tragic peak. The assailant became bolder, striking in ways that were increasingly violent and alarming. Couples who had once felt cautious on the streets now faced a very real threat, as the killer seemed to target homes and roads without warning. Each new crime heightened fear, and the community's awareness of the danger became ever more acute. Investigators, while still methodical, found these attacks especially challenging to analyze. The assailant appeared to act with both knowledge of the town and a careful avoidance of leaving clear evidence. Each scene provided subtle clues, but nothing that definitively revealed the identity of the perpetrator. This elusiveness contributed to a sense of suspense and uncertainty that hung over Texarkana. Residents had to contend with the reality that, even with law enforcement actively involved, there was no guarantee of safety during the night hours. One of the critical attacks involved a couple who were ambushed while driving on a quiet road outside town. The encounter was sudden and terrifying. Witnesses later reported the use of a firearm, and the events left the survivors shaken but alive. This incident, along with similar attacks, demonstrated the increasing danger posed by the Phantom Killer and underscored the urgency of capturing the person responsible. The final murders in the series brought the full horror of the situation into stark relief. The assailants' actions escalated beyond previous encounters, and the consequences were tragically irreversible. The victims' families were left to grapple with grief, the town with shock, and law enforcement with mounting pressure to solve the case. The contrast between the ordinary lives of Texarkana residents and the violence that had struck so suddenly emphasized the fragility of safety and the unpredictability of human behavior. Despite the fear and confusion, the community remained vigilant. Neighbors continued to look out for one another, patrols increased, and safety precautions were implemented as standard practice. Families traveled in pairs or groups at night, homes were carefully secured, and conversations frequently centered on avoiding potential danger. The critical attacks had changed daily life, instilling a lasting awareness of the need for caution and preparation. As you listen to the rain falling gently outside tonight, picture the streets and homes of Texarkana during these fateful nights. The quiet roads suddenly disrupted, families tense with anticipation, and the steady vigilance of residents determined to protect themselves and their loved ones. These critical attacks were the turning point in the Moonlight Murders, illustrating both the danger of the unknown and the resilience of a community facing an invisible threat. Tonight, we continue to follow the story, moving toward the investigation's resolution, the efforts to identify the Phantom Killer, and the lasting impact on Texarkana. As the rain continues its soft rhythm outside, we now move to the stage when the investigation into the Texarkana Moonlight Murders began to make meaningful progress. After months of fear, speculation, and careful detective work, law enforcement started to identify patterns and narrow down possible leads, bringing a faint glimmer of hope to a town long gripped by uncertainty. Detectives meticulously reviewed every piece of evidence collected from previous crime scenes. Witness descriptions, tire tracks, footprints, and timelines were carefully compared, looking for connections that might reveal the identity of the Phantom Killer. Each detail, no matter how minor it seemed, was analyzed for clues about the assailant's habits, preferred locations, and potential methods of escape. The painstaking nature of this work required patience and precision, reflecting the careful approach needed to solve a case of such complexity. Community involvement also played a key role at this stage. Residents continued to report suspicious activity, sometimes noting strange cars, unknown figures on quiet streets, or unusual behavior in the evenings. These tips provided investigators with additional context and helped to narrow the focus of their search. While fear remained, the town's vigilance became a valuable resource in understanding the Phantom Killer's movements. Law enforcement also began coordinating with agencies outside Texarkana, comparing similar unsolved cases in neighboring regions to explore possible connections. While the killer had remained elusive, patterns began to emerge that suggested both familiarity with the local area and a methodical approach to selecting victims. The goal was to anticipate potential actions, protect the community, and eventually bring the assailant to justice. At the same time, authorities examined psychological profiles, considering the motives and mindset of the individual responsible. This process, though less visible to the public, was critical in shaping investigative strategies. Understanding the behavior behind the attacks offered a way to predict possible future actions and inform decisions about patrols, road closures, and public advisories. Despite progress in the investigation, uncertainty persisted. The Phantom Killer remained unidentified, and no arrests were made during this period. The lingering mystery continued to cast a shadow over the town, affecting daily routines, social interactions, and the general sense of safety. Yet, the turning point in the investigation demonstrated that careful observation, collaboration, and persistence were beginning to yield results, however incremental. As you listen to the rain falling softly outside tonight, imagine the detectives moving quietly through Texarkana, examining each clue, speaking to witnesses, and reconstructing events that had already shaken the town. The work was slow and deliberate, a patient unraveling of a complex mystery where every detail mattered. The moonlight murders had disrupted ordinary life, but now, with patterns emerging and insights slowly forming, the town and its protectors could begin to regain a measure of control. The investigation was reaching a turning point, offering hope that the unknown presence that had haunted Texarkana might eventually be understood and perhaps contained. As the rain continues to fall softly outside, we now move into the phase when law enforcement intensified their search for the Phantom Killer. Months had passed since the first attacks, and the residents of Texarkana remained cautious, aware that the mysterious assailant had not yet been caught. Detectives, driven by both urgency and careful precision, focused on narrowing down suspects and anticipating the killer's next moves. The search involved constant patrols of the streets, particularly in areas where attacks had previously occurred. Officers monitored quiet roads, bridges, and rural paths late at night, hoping to intercept the assailant or gather fresh evidence. These efforts required vigilance, coordination, and a calm, patient approach, as the goal was to ensure the safety of residents while also pursuing leads in a challenging and unpredictable case. Witness testimony played a crucial role in guiding the search. Residents who had seen unfamiliar vehicles or individuals on quiet nights provided descriptions that helped detectives refine their understanding of the Phantom Killer's movements. Though many observations were vague or incomplete, collectively they offered a framework for focusing the investigation and identifying areas of particular concern. Investigators also worked to establish patterns of timing and behavior. They examined previous incidents to determine likely locations, days, and hours when the assailant might strike again. This methodical approach was designed to protect the community, anticipate potential attacks, and narrow the search to the most probable scenarios. The process required patience and attention to detail, as the Phantom Killer's ability to remain elusive made every clue important. At the same time, authorities reached out to neighboring towns and counties, sharing information about the attacks in Texarkana and requesting tips about similar incidents elsewhere. While the killer's identity remained unknown, the collaborative effort reflected the seriousness of the case and the dedication of law enforcement to solving a mystery that had gripped an entire community. Public awareness also played a role in the search. Residents were encouraged to stay vigilant, report suspicious behavior, and take precautions during evening hours. Families continued to adjust their routines, walking in pairs, keeping lights on, and remaining alert to unusual activity. The combined efforts of the police and the community demonstrated that even in the face of uncertainty, cooperation and careful observation could make a difference. As you listen to the rain falling gently outside tonight, Imagine the detectives moving quietly through Texarkana streets, officers observing darkened roads, and residents alert yet trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. The search for the Phantom Killer was a delicate balance of caution, patience, and perseverance, a process that demanded both diligence and calm determination. The Moonlight Murders left a lasting impression on Texarkana, but the search for the assailant highlighted the town's resilience, the dedication of law enforcement, and the importance of community vigilance. As the story nears its conclusion, we move toward the final reflections, the unanswered questions, and the enduring legacy of the Phantom Killer in the memories of those who lived through the terror. The Texarkana Moonlight Murders remain one of the most unsettling unsolved cases in American true crime history, not because of elaborate clues or dramatic confrontations, but because of how quietly the unknown slips into the spaces where people once felt safe. As the decades passed, the case settled into a kind of stillness, much like the soft rhythm of rain on a window, always present but never overwhelming. A story that lingers instead of shouts. After the final confirmed incident in 1946, the people of Texarkana slowly rebuilt their sense of normalcy. Curfews lifted, patrols thinned, families began returning to the routines they once feared to repeat. But even as daily life stitched itself back together, the question of who committed these crimes never faded. It remained like a closed book left on a shelf, untouched but always noticed. Investigators continued working long after the public moved on. They compared statements, reevaluated timelines, studied reports, and chased leads that often dissolved as quickly as they appeared. Through the years, several individuals drew attention, each surrounded by their own cloud of suspicion. Yet no one was ever charged. Perhaps that is one of the defining features of this case: the absence of finality. Texarkana grew, changed, and modernized, but the case stayed woven into its identity. Younger generations heard fragments of the story from parents or grandparents, some sharing memories of locked windows, quiet car rides, or the way people avoided certain roads at night. Others learned about the case only through documentaries or articles, encountering it from a distance rather than through personal memory. Even so, the story holds the same weight. There is something about the unknown that captures attention more deeply than the known. The idea that someone could vanish from history without explanation leaves room for endless interpretation. Over the years, theories multiplied. Some proposed that the perpetrator was an outsider passing through. Others believed the individual lived in Texarkana and moved on without attracting attention. A few suggested that the person may have been interviewed but never truly recognized as the likely culprit. No theory ever rose to the level of certainty. For many residents, the story's power lies not in fear but in reflection. It serves as a reminder of how communities respond to unexpected hardship and how they heal. Texarkana did not remain trapped in that tense spring of 1946. Instead, the city became known for resilience. People supported one another, rebuilt trust in shared spaces, and allowed life to continue with quiet determination. Today, the Texarkana Moonlight Murders sit at the intersection of history and mystery. They are studied by researchers, revisited by writers, and remembered by locals, not for the sensational elements, but for the questions they leave behind. Questions about human nature, chance, timing, and the ways events shape collective memory. And so the case rests in a gentle kind of uncertainty, unresolved but no longer overwhelming. A shadow, not a storm, a quiet chapter in a much larger story, the kind that allows listeners to drift into calm reflection, carried by the steady comfort of rain.